Good evening, Tom Raikes. Thanks so much for being with us. Is it fair to describe you as a cannabis entrepreneur?
Yes, I guess it is. I've been working in the industry for nearly 20 years now with varying businesses, all centered around the genetics and seed space.
So, two of the most well known brands and most successful brands that you built are Seedsman and Pharma Seeds. Could you explain to us what these companies do?
Seedsman, we started in 2002, initially in the UK and later moving it to Spain. The idea really is to make the most of a legal loophole that allowed for the sale of cannabis seeds whilst not actually allowing for their cultivation, to raise really the issue of cannabis prohibition, to engage discussion and to show how really ridiculous it is and around some of the laws around it. And the idea really to create a brand that encouraged discussion, sold good quality products. And more recently, when we did move to Spain, we found that the domestic cultivation was allowed in Spain. So we have some markets where you can sell the products where they can be grown, and others, importantly, it's to note, like in the UK, where it's not legal to grow them. The aim really for us was to highlight the what the plants could do in what environments. We have certain varieties that will produce high levels of THC indoors when intensively grown, but will produce a slightly different, lesser kind of cannabinoid profile when grown outdoors. In the furor of the concern about skunk cannabis, it was important to note stuff about potency, really, and what was to be learned there. To me, there were certainly improvements with the genetics, but it was also a really intensive and improvements in farming and indoor farming in particular that brought on these changes. Obviously, the newspapers, really went for the skunk story in a large way, and the irony is that I believe GW Pharmaceuticals now have all the rights for the original skunk varieties.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
That has been cornered then.
Well, suddenly the man that they were working with or bought all their initial genetics off was one of the people responsible for creating this variety called Skunk Number One back in the late 70s in
Mhm.
America, and then later in the early 80s in Amsterdam. A very knowledgeable man named David Watson, he sold all the varieties, all the rights to his varieties to GW Pharmaceuticals. But we also used to buy seeds off him at a similar time.
So this is you're already touching upon this interesting area of intellectual property and rights to cannabis strains, which we can discuss in some various fora. But I first wanted to ask you, in general, the main challenges to building a successful business and having to navigate through loopholes and so on. Just tell us a bit about it.
So, I mean, the biggest problem we've had, and I think probably that our colleagues and competition have had, is, especially in the UK, is with access to banking facilities.
Okay.
Proceeds of crime acts and money laundering is obviously a very and quite reasonably is a very serious concern, and any part of a cannabis business touches upon that, and banks are incredibly cautious. We moved our business to Spain because of better ease and better access to banks and financial institutions, because of the different positioning of cannabis there, and the laws around, basically in Spain, you're allowed to do what you want in the privacy of your own home if it's not for profit. But the banking has certainly been the major challenge. Further to that, friends and family and what they think of the business, which has changed hugely over time. But yeah, the banking has been the main issue.
Okay. There's also another aspect to this market, and that is the very organized criminal groups are involved in this. And I know from other small-scale entrepreneurs that they've had their very unpleasant run-ins with organized criminals in certain areas. Has that ever been a problem for you?
So suddenly we've had kind of inquiries for products on scales that we haven't been happy with selling in. We haven't asked too many questions about who they are. We normally find some way to let people know that we don't have the products and we're not interested to engage with them. We sell seeds in the UK solely as genetic souvenirs in small quantities, and the same in Europe, where we're able to sell them for cultivation. We're selling them for small time cultivators.
Many, and you mentioned quality earlier on, and many of your customers, I believe, come back to you, and that is testimony to the quality of your service. And I wanted to ask you about your relationship with your customers.
We are marketing people for first and foremost. Clients are key for us. We are keen to keep them happy, keep them collecting the seeds that they buy. So, service is key, really. In the days of Amazon, getting products to customers has to be done quickly, efficiently, and be well communicated. And that's something that we really kind of focus our time on.
I see. And you say that your business is in Spain. I guess you also have customers in Spain. So you'll have customers in the UK, in Spain, maybe all over Europe.
Yes, exactly. Yes, all over Europe.
And your main product are seeds, aren't they?
Our main product is seeds. We do also sell vaporizers and some other paraphernalia. We also have another website that sells drug testing kits, some for cannabis, but also for other drugs, which we sell on a kind of harm minimization basis. We're just redeveloping that website at the moment, and working with a friend who runs the drug action team on that to highlight impurities around drugs and what they're being cut with, at the same time as selling testing kits.
So the strains, I want to talk about a bit more. Where do you get them from? I mean, where do you get seeds from, and how do you ensure that they're consistent?
So the production has changed over the years that we've been going. We buy from many different companies, some in Holland, a lot of them in Spain. For a little while, there was a lot of production in Switzerland. Production changed according to laws and interpretation of laws. But yeah, most of our suppliers are now based in Spain. In regards to kind of stability and consistency is really knowing your supplier and reading reviews about them. We don't just jump on with someone straight away if they're offering us seeds. We normally actually wait for them to be established in the industry, and then we'll decide if we want to sell their products, if they fit with our agenda.
And staying with the seeds and the strains, what are the most popular ones? And are there patterns that you can take different?
There are a lot at the moment. I think probably the same potentially with cannabis being bought on the street are Californian varieties that all have quite kind of fancy, sweet-sounding names: gelato, wedding cake, and they're very name-focused actually. And a lot of different seed sellers have these varieties, although they may be quite different one from the other. But yeah, it's mostly driven actually at the moment by American kind of hype actually.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. Although increasingly, and in the last, I guess probably 7 or 8 years ago, when CBD varieties started being released, we kind of focused on those. We were interested in medical application of cannabis. We were interested in those kind of in Spain and the places where it was legal, is supplying them with genetics that they could produce their own oils and topicals and whatever else they wanted to produce for medical use.
So you provide for medical users as well.
We provide varieties that have a pretty known cannabinoid outcome, and then encourage whoever's going to be growing them to know what they need for their illness and what they're happy with. And a lot of clients of ours use kind of trial and error with plants and the extracts from them for their illnesses, with varying degrees of success.
You mentioned and you called it the skunk furore before, and and the term skunk, I think, is highly contentious, and I think it's probably become a polemical term that's used to disparage or to in some way
Absolutely.
stigmatize cannabis users. But I was wondering, it did suggest that that there were high THC containing strains. Has the trend been, as far as you understand, for ever more potent strains?
Yes, and that seems to still exist. We're now finding with our new business Pharmaseeds that that comes through into the more licensed regulated model. At the moment, the kind of key market in the medicinal cannabis at the moment, certainly in Europe, is the German medicinal market, where I believe there's about 70 or 80,000 patients, and the demand there is for high THC cannabis
I
predominantly.
see. I see. And do you know how that is being consumed?
I'm not an expert on how it's being consumed, but I presume vaporized or smoked. It's certainly being sold in a herbal format.
Yes. Okay. Thanks. But one of the sort of things that people have been suggesting is that as the market is maturing and customers are becoming more nuanced and more discerning, that there has been a downward shift in the THC strength among many consumers.
I think that probably happens more in places like the US, where there's a bit more choice. Certainly, because it's the German market at the moment, from my understanding of it, is the initial patients that are taking cannabis products are people that were enjoying them illegally beforehand. And so they're generally the ones with a predisposition to enjoying THC products. As that market grows from 70,000 to 140,000 to 240,000, I think more variety will be required.
Mm-hmm.
Because not everyone wants to have the very psychological feeling of high THC varieties. And now there are very interesting possibilities with other varieties out there. So I think breeders have started moving on from high THC varieties, which in the 90s, early 2000s, they simply hadn't, and all focus was on THC and yield and shortening flowering times.
Exactly, it has become a lot more diverse in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, we have in the state in America with kind of hemp CBD varieties. We have some very capable breeders, all working in Colorado and places like that, focusing on varieties that have suddenly under 1% THC, sometimes at less, but looking at the terpene flavors, flavonoids, and all of these things, and coming up with some very interesting products. And there is a big markets where it's legal in CBD herbal cannabis. Switzerland the market is vast. In the States now, it's growing hugely and is legal in most states. And people really are, I think, probably like microdosing and psychedelics. A lot of people really like having cannabis that is super low in THC.
That's really
there is
interesting.
another group of people who wouldn't even consider smoking that kind of product, but the numbers are changing for sure.
No, the diversification of the market, I think, is fascinating, and bringing in new consumer groups also through the new delivery mechanisms. I mean, vaping, I think, has made a radical difference. I mean, wouldn't you say, to both the image and the reach that cannabis has?
I think certainly, yeah, certainly less so in the UK and Europe still. I think actually the CBD and oils and things like that, even if they've got THC in it, have probably been pretty important too. But I guess, yeah, herbal vaporizing things. I think there's still a long way to go in the UK. You look at some of the US states where you've got these cartridges and flavors and all of these kind of products that are completely clean, smellless. They really changed the perception of the whole cannabis thing.
Yeah.
Cannabis is associated with a certain type of pungent smell, but with vaping, that just it's not around so much, and that I think that's a big change as well.
First of all, are there any lessons that you think we should learn as we move towards the normalization of cannabis?
I mean, my view is, and I quite like the US model, is they seem to have a network of smaller businesses that in the cannabis industry, whereas the Canada is changing a little bit now, but at the start of the cannabis industry, you had these very large companies that were growing up. They got stock money publicly raised and were buying up everything they possibly could. In the States, there are a lot more kind of I guess what they call mama and papa businesses that are involved in cannabis, and it's a little bit more localized, I think, which personally I think is much more interesting on a marketing level. I think it's more interesting on a social level. I think it employs more people. I think it's more trustworthy. I think it's more like the kind of wine industry as opposed to big alcohol or big tobacco. And for me, that's a much more interesting model, I think.
More attractive, and you think it would secure greater variety and quality?
I think certainly greater variety and quality. I think you can get probably like wine again, more localized trends, and I think it'll allow places like the Caribbean to keep their credentials as interesting, cannabis destinations to go to and try the local products. And for me, that's really interesting. I think otherwise places like the Caribbean threaten to be slightly whitewashed, though, everything they've been through, which would be really sad.
Indeed, and there are other areas too. I mean, in India or in Africa, where
Sure.
local strains are being
I
displayed.
mean, yeah, I would love to see all those, Indian hashes and Pakistani hashes being available in, legally everywhere. It would be great,
Yes.
great to see. Let people have the choice.
So you've been a passionate advocate for drug policy reform, and you also support, you fund research and innovations. Now, in the UK, what benefits do you think the UK would gain from radical reform in its policies?
I think certainly employment would be one. I think public health would be greatly improved. This whole kind of just say no and ignore it doesn't work. It hasn't worked. I think the cannabis strength is high in this country. That won't necessarily change, and I think we probably will end up having maybe a bit more people using cannabis eventually, but I think would have much greater safety around it, and being able to have different varieties, having CBD cannabis available to those that need it. But yeah, I think having the variety and having the cleanliness, openness, packaging that's correctly labeled, being able to talk about it properly, those that do have problems being able to identify it and get them into the right treatment. It just seems to work to me at every level. I think this kind of previous moral stigma we've had over it is ancient and proven to be wrong time and time again.
So finally, I mean, last question. We are going through sort of fast changing times when it comes to the drug scene in general. What would you like policymakers to do next?
I mean, that's a good question. I think review internationally what has been happening over the last few years. I think they've got to look at the different models. My fear is that we will get into this territory of big businesses and big tobacco, and that actually worries me. I think we will lose the potential benefits of legalizing cannabis if we leave it all in the hands of very large businesses. I would like to see people that are involved in the illegal industry being allowed to be involved in a legal industry. I think that is really important. I think you've got to be careful around that, but I think it needs to happen. And just really, I guess finding the right model that is going to work for us. And there are lots of different ways. The coffee shop model certainly we wouldn't go down the same route as the coffee shop model of Holland, which has been fatally flawed as the whole supply to it has been completely legal. But I guess having those kind of facilities and allowing people to use cannabis in public spaces is an interesting one. There's also, mail order and things like that we could rely on these days. There are so many different models that all have their positives and their negatives, and I think they've got to assess those properly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and learn from experience, learn from the data of Colorado, of Canada, and all the other places that now have a few years behind them.
Yes, that's the fascinating thing about it. We now have data, and we have comparable experience to look.
Which we never had before, and we now have whatever it is, 3, 4, 5 years. It's enough data to start making informed decisions, I believe.
So long overdue, but it's also, I think, a really exciting time to be in because, you know, I think it's pioneering times, you know, and on just about to embark on a great big project, we hope.
Yeah, I mean that's the hope. Things are going to change. We've existed with our initial business in a very unregulated world, which we have invited more regulation. But with pharmacies and our new business, it is trying to operate in a more regulated part of the market that looks to really raise the standards and have much better levels of quality assurance and the like, GMP, GACP, all of these kind of things that we are trying to adhere to bring better practices and to learn from other industries and bring them to the cannabis industry.
Hmm. Okay. All right, Tom. Well, thank you very much for coming
Pleasure.
tonight, and I really look forward to seeing you again on April the 1st when we
Exactly.
are with a full panel. Thank you.
Fantastic. Look forward to it.